Karen stormed out the front door, clutching her prized tomatoes. "Those are mine," she shrieked, glaring at her neighbor Sarah, who stood in the middle of the shared garden plot. Sarah gripped the delicate vines, unwilling to let the hard-earned produce be stolen again. "No, Karen, these are my tomatoes that I grew. You can't just take them whenever you feel like it." Veins pulsing in her forehead, Karen yanked the tomatoes free, soil cascading to the ground. "I'll take whatever I want from this garden. It's not like you're using it properly anyway." Biting back tears of frustration, Sarah watched helplessly as Karen marched back to her own house, slamming the door behind her. This was the last straw. Something had to be done. Later that evening, Sarah paced her kitchen, mind racing. She'd spent weeks carefully tending the garden, only to have Karen continuously steal the fruits of her labor. Didn't that woman have any shame? Glancing out the window, an idea began to form. If Karen wouldn't respect the garden, maybe she'd learn to fear it. Sarah opened a drawer and extracted a small packet of seeds, ghost peppers. A devilish grin spread across her face. The next morning, Sarah woke early and headed outside. Kneeling in the soft soil, she carefully planted the ghost pepper seeds around the perimeter of the garden plot. Once the seedlings sprouted, she'd make sure Karen got an up-close and personal introduction. Days passed, and the garden began to flourish. Sarah watched eagerly as the pepper plants grew taller, their waxy leaves unfurling. She couldn't wait to see the look on Karen's face when she reached for those innocent tomatoes. Sure enough, it didn't take long. A week later, Sarah heard the all-too-familiar sounds of Karen stomping through the yard. Peeking through the window, she saw the other woman bending down, plucking a ripe tomato from the vine. Sarah held her breath, waiting. Suddenly, Karen let out an ear-piercing scream that echoed through the neighborhood. She dropped the tomato, clutching her hands to her face as she danced in agony. Sarah watched, a satisfied grin spreading across her face, as Karen frantically rinsed her burning eyes and skin under the garden hose. After what felt like an eternity, Karen managed to stagger back to her house, whimpering in pain. Sarah couldn't help but chuckle to herself. Maybe now the woman would think twice before helping herself to Sarah's hard work. But as the sun set, Sarah's amusement slowly gave way to unease. Had she gone too far? Planting those ghost peppers was a risky move, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Karen might retaliate. Still, Sarah told herself the woman had it coming. She'd learned to respect the boundaries of the shared garden. Hoping for the best, Sarah headed inside, already planning her next steps. If Karen dared to come near her precious plants again, she'd be in for an even bigger surprise. The next morning, Sarah peered out the window, scanning the yard for any sign of Karen. To her relief, the other woman was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps the ghost pepper incident had taught her a lesson. As Sarah stepped outside to water her plants, she noticed a small envelope taped to the garden fence. Furrowing her brow, she pulled it free and ripped it open. Inside was a hastily scrawled note. "Sarah, you think you're so clever, don't you? Well, just wait. I'm going to make you pay for what you did. No one messes with me and gets away with it. Sincerely, your neighbor, Karen." Sarah's heart raced as she read the ominous message. So much for her plan working. Now Karen was clearly out for revenge. She crumpled the note in her fist, mind spinning with worry. Later that day, as Sarah tended to her flourishing garden, she kept glancing nervously at Karen's house, half expecting the other woman to come storming out at any moment. The tension was palpable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, a loud crash from outside made her jump. Racing to the window, she saw that one of her prized tomato plants had been snapped in half, its lush fruit scattered across the soil. Rushing outside, Sarah knelt beside the ruined plant, her heart sinking. "No, no, no," she muttered, gently cradling the broken stem. This wasn't an accident. Someone had clearly done this on purpose. Just then, a movement in the shadows caught her eye. Squinting, she could make out the outline of a figure slipping back toward Karen's house. Sarah's blood boiled with rage. That conniving woman had deliberately destroyed her hard work. Storming across the yard, Sarah pounded on Karen's front door, fury etching every line of her face. When the other woman finally answered, Sarah didn't bother with pleasantries. "I know it was you, Karen. How dare you sabotage my garden after what I did to you?" she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger. Karen's eyes widened in feigned innocence. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been inside all evening." Gritting her teeth, Sarah fought the urge to throttle the woman. "Don't you dare lie to me. I saw you skulking around out there. If you come near my garden again, I swear I'll—" "You'll what?" Karen interrupted, a smug smile spreading across her face. "Go ahead, make your threats. But just remember, I have ways of making your life a living hell." With that, she slammed the door in Sarah's face, leaving Sarah standing on the porch, trembling with rage and fear. This was war. Sarah stood on the porch, hands clenched into fists as she glared at Karen's front door. The nerve of that woman, destroying her garden and then blatantly lying about it. She had to do something, but what? Turning on her heel, Sarah stormed back to her own house, mind racing. She couldn't let Karen get away with this. It was time to take the gloves off. Rummaging through her kitchen drawers, she pulled out a small notepad and pen. "Okay, Sarah, think," she muttered to herself as she began jotting down ideas. She needed a plan, something that would show Karen once and for all that she couldn't be pushed around. Her eyes landed on the ghost pepper seeds she planted around the garden, and a spark of inspiration ignited. The next morning, Sarah rose early and headed outside, a determined glint in her eye. Kneeling by the garden, she carefully inspected the burgeoning pepper plants, smiling to herself. They were thriving, the waxy leaves glistening in the early sunlight. Perfect. Retrieving a pair of gardening shears, she began snipping off the ripest peppers, gathering them into a small basket. Once she had a sizable collection, she hurried inside, eager to put her plan into action. In the kitchen, Sarah donned a pair of thick rubber gloves and carefully began processing the ghost peppers. Using a mortar and pestle, she ground the fiery fruits into a fine powder, coughing and sputtering as the pungent aroma filled the air. With the powder ready, Sarah transferred it to an empty spice jar, sealing the lid tightly. Then, she set to work on her next step, baking. Pulling out a large mixing bowl, she began assembling the ingredients for a batch of her famous chocolate chip cookies. As the cookies baked, filling the house with a tantalizing scent, Sarah couldn't help but chuckle to herself. Karen was in for a rude awakening. Once she got a taste of these special treats, she'd think twice before messing with Sarah's garden again. When the cookies had cooled, Sarah carefully sprinkled a generous amount of the ground ghost pepper powder over the top, ensuring that each one was coated. Then, she arranged them neatly on a plate and headed outside, making a beeline for Karen's front door. Steeling her nerves, Sarah knocked firmly, plastering a sweet smile on her face as Karen answered. "Hello, Karen," she said, her voice dripping with false kindness. "I baked some cookies for you as a peace offering. I hope you enjoy them." Karen's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but she accepted the plate, muttering a begrudging thanks before closing the door. Sarah couldn't wait to see the look on her face when those cookies hit her tongue. Returning to her own house, Sarah settled into a chair, waiting with bated breath. It was only a matter of time before the fireworks began. It didn't take long for the fireworks to start. Barely 10 minutes had passed before Sarah heard a piercing scream emanating from Karen's house, followed by the sound of the front door slamming open. Rushing to the window, Sarah watched as Karen came barreling out of the house, her face bright red and contorted in agony. The woman was clawing at her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as she howled in pain. My mouth is on fire," Karen screeched, stumbling around the yard. She frantically gulped down water from the garden hose, but the burning sensation only seemed to intensify. Sarah couldn't help but chuckle to herself, a smug grin spreading across her face. "Looks like you've learned your lesson, Karen," she muttered under her breath, watching the other woman's distress with a sense of twisted satisfaction. After what felt like an eternity, Karen finally managed to stagger back into her house, slamming the door behind her. Sarah waited with bated breath, wondering what the woman's next move would be. Sure enough, it didn't take long for Karen to reemerge, her face flushed with rage. Storming across the yard, she pounded on Sarah's front door, bellowing, "I know what you did, you conniving witch." Those cookies were laced with something. Sarah feigned innocence as she opened the door, tilting her head in mock concern. "Why, Karen, whatever do you mean?" "I simply baked you a nice batch of cookies as a peace offering. I had no idea they would upset your stomach so." "Don't give me that innocent act," Karen spat, spittle flying from her lips. "Those cookies were covered in some kind of hot pepper. You did this on purpose, didn't you?" Shrugging nonchalantly, Sarah replied, "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. I used my standard recipe. Perhaps you're just not used to a little spice in your life." Letting out a frustrated growl, Karen raised a trembling fist. "You better watch your back, Sarah. This isn't over by a long shot. I'll make you pay for this, I swear it." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her own house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Maybe now the meddlesome woman would think twice before encroaching on her garden again. But as the adrenaline wore off, Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning. Karen was clearly unhinged, and she had no idea what the other woman might do in retaliation. Shaking her head, she retreated back inside, determined to stay vigilant. Over the next few days, Sarah kept a close eye on Karen's house, half expecting the other woman to come charging out at any moment. But to her relief, the neighborhood remained eerily quiet. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. Karen had to be plotting something. She wasn't the type to simply let this go. The thought made Sarah's stomach churn with anxiety. One afternoon, as Sarah was tending to her flourishing garden, movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. Glancing up, she saw Karen cautiously making her way across the yard, a small paper bag clutched in her hand. Narrowing her eyes, Sarah watched as the other woman approached the garden fence, carefully reaching through the slats to deposit the bag's contents. Curiosity getting the better of her, Sarah waited until Karen had retreated back to her own property before hurrying over to investigate. Peering into the bag, Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Inside were several small, shiny objects, nails. Her mouth went dry as she realized the implication. Karen had sabotaged her garden, trying to create a hazard that could potentially harm her or her prized plants. Rage boiling in her veins, Sarah snatched up the bag and stormed toward Karen's house, determination etched on her face. Pounding on the door, she waited impatiently until the other woman answered, her expression one of feigned innocence. "What is the meaning of this, Karen?" Sarah demanded, shoving the bag of nails into the woman's hands. "Trying to booby-trap my garden, are you? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Karen's eyes widened briefly before a sneer settled on her lips. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I was simply cleaning up some debris around the yard and thought I'd dispose of it properly. Don't give me that nonsense." Sarah spat, her voice rising. "I saw you, Karen. I know you planted those nails to try and hurt me or my garden. What the hell is wrong with you?" Unfazed, Karen simply shrugged. "Prove it. Unless you've got solid evidence, you're just making wild accusations." Clenching her fists, Sarah fought the urge to throttle the other woman. "Mark my words, Karen, I'm not going to let you get away with this. If you so much as look at my garden the wrong way again, You'll what?" Karen interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. Go ahead, make your threats. But I've got ways of making your life a living hell, remember? You be wise to watch your step. With that, she slammed the door in Sarah's face, leaving Sarah standing on the porch, trembling with rage and frustration. This was war, and it was only just beginning. Fuming, Sarah stormed back to her own house, her mind racing with the whirlwind of emotions. How dare Karen try to sabotage her garden like that? It was beyond unforgivable. She had to do something, but what? Pacing the kitchen, Sarah racked her brain, trying to come up with a plan. She couldn't keep letting Karen walk all over her, but retaliating could have serious consequences. She couldn't risk getting arrested or sued, no matter how tempting it might be. Suddenly, an idea began to take shape. Maybe there was a way to outsmart Karen without resorting to underhanded tactics. A small smile tugged at the corners of Sarah's lips as she started rifling through her drawers, searching for a specific item. The next morning, Sarah rose early and headed outside, a sense of determination in her step. Kneeling in the garden, she carefully began setting up her trap, making sure every detail was perfect. If this worked, Karen would never mess with her plants again. Later that day, as Sarah was tending to her tomato vines, she heard the familiar sound of Karen's footsteps approaching. Glancing up, she watched as the other woman strode across the yard, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Well, look who's back, Karen sneered, eyeing the garden with a possessive gaze. Trying to salvage what's left of your precious little plot, I see. Sarah simply smiled serenely, keeping her gaze trained on the plants. Why, hello, Karen. Lovely day, isn't it? I do hope you'll enjoy the additions I've made to the garden. Karen's brow furrowed in confusion, but before she could respond, the ground beneath her feet suddenly gave way. With a startled yelp, she found herself plunging into a deep pit, landing with a thud in the soft soil below. Sarah peered down at the other woman, a satisfied smirk on her face. Oops, did I forget to mention the new garden features I installed? My apologies. I do hope you're comfortable down there. Sputtering with rage, Karen glared up at Sarah, her face flushed with humiliation. Get me out of here this instant, you crazy woman, she demanded, frantically clawing at the dirt walls. Shaking her head, Sarah tiffed sympathetically. Now, Karen, let's not be hasty. I think a little time out in the garden might do you some good. Maybe it'll teach you to keep your hands off what doesn't belong to you. With that, she turned and headed back to her house, leaving Karen trapped in the pit. As she walked, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Maybe now, the meddlesome woman would finally learn her lesson. But as the adrenaline wore off, a nagging sense of unease crept back into Sarah's mind. How long could she keep Karen trapped down there? And what would the consequences be? She couldn't help but wonder if she'd taken things too far this time. For the rest of the day, Sarah tried to distract herself from thoughts of Karen's predicament, busying herself with tending to the garden and other household chores. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of her stomach. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself drawn back to the garden, peering anxiously at the pit she'd dug. She could just barely make out Karen's form, the other woman still struggling to climb out. Steeling her nerves, Sarah approached the edge of the pit, clearing her throat to get Karen's attention. How are you holding up down there, Karen? She called, trying to keep her voice light and casual. Karen's head snapped up, her features contorted in a venomous glare. How do you think I'm holding up, you lunatic? She spat, her voice laced with fury. Get me out of this damn hole right now, or I swear I'll. You'll what? Sarah interrupted, raising a hand to silence the other woman. Threaten me again. I think you're in no position to be making demands, Karen. Gritting her teeth, Karen glowered up at her. This has gone too far, Sarah. I could have you arrested for this. It's illegal entrapment. Sarah couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Oh, really? And what exactly are you going to tell the police, That you were trespassing in my garden, and I simply wanted to teach you a lesson. Pausing, she shook her head slowly. No, I don't think that's going to fly. You see, Karen, you've been a thorn in my side for far too long. I'm not going to just sit back and let you run roughshod over me and my property anymore. Leaning closer to the edge of the pit, Sarah fixed Karen with a steely gaze. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay down there until you learn to respect the boundaries of this garden. And if you so much as try to come near it again, well, let's just say I have a few more tricks up my sleeve. Karen's eyes widened with a mix of fear and fury. You can't do this. This is kidnapping, plain and simple. Let me out of here, or I'll. You'll what? Sarah interrupted again, her voice dripping with condescension. Honestly, Karen, you really need to come up with some new material. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a garden to tend to. With that, she turned and walked back toward her house, ignoring Karen's enraged shouts echoing behind her. As she reached the porch, Sarah paused, a frown creasing her brow. Had she really just taken things too far? The sound of her phone ringing jolted her from her thoughts, and she hurried inside to answer it. Hello. Sarah, this is Officer Thompson. We've received a disturbance call from your neighbor Karen. She's claiming you've trapped her in a pit on your property. Is this true? Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she suddenly felt very, very afraid. Sarah's mouth went dry as the officer's words registered. I'm not sure what you're talking about, officer, she stammered, desperately trying to sound nonchalant. Ma'am, we have reason to believe that your neighbor is currently trapped in a pit on your property, the officer said, his tone grave. If this is true, I'm going to need you to release her immediately and explain the situation. Swallowing hard, Sarah glanced nervously out the window, half expecting to see flashing police lights in the distance. Well, you see, officer, there's been a bit of a misunderstanding between Karen and myself. But I can assure you, I had no intention of causing her any harm. The officer's voice hardened. That's not what she's telling us. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Is Karen trapped in a pit on your property? Sighing heavily, Sarah resigned herself to the truth. Yes, officer, she is. But I can explain. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with your hands up and wait for the officers to arrive, the officer interrupted. We'll discuss the details at the station. Sarah's heart raced as she slowly opened the front door, placing her hands in the air as instructed. Within minutes, the familiar wail of sirens filled the air, and 2 police cruisers came screeching to a halt in front of her house. As the officers approached, Sarah could see the triumphant gleam in Karen's eyes as she was carefully extricated from the pit. The other woman shot her a venomous glare, no doubt savoring her impending victory. Sarah felt a sinking sensation in the pit of her stomach as the officers cuffed her wrists and led her to one of the waiting patrol cars. This was not how she had envisioned this confrontation ending. At the police station, Sarah sat in a cold, sterile interrogation room, her mind racing with worry. How was she going to explain this to the officers? Would they even believe her side of the story? After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened, and a stern-faced detective entered the room, settling into the chair across from her. All right, Ms. Wilkins, let's start from the beginning. Tell me exactly what happened between you and your neighbor, Karen. Taking a deep breath, Sarah launched into a detailed account of the ongoing feud, describing Karen's constant trespassing and theft, as well as her own efforts to protect her garden. She explained how she had set the trap in a desperate attempt to curb the other woman's behavior, never intending for it to go this far. The detective listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Sarah had finished, he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. So, you're telling me you've intentionally trapped your neighbor in a pit on your property? Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, but I was just trying to. Regardless of your intentions, Ms. Wilkins, what you did was illegal. The detective interrupted, his tone stern. Kidnapping and false imprisonment are serious charges, and you could be facing significant jail time. Sarah's stomach lurched, and she felt a wave of panic wash over her. But I was only trying to protect my garden. Karen has been stealing from me for months, and the authorities wouldn't do anything about it. The detective shook his head, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. I understand you felt wronged, Ms. Wilkins, but that doesn't justify taking the law into your own hands. You should have pursued legal channels to address the issue. Leaning forward, he fixed Sarah with a piercing gaze. Now, I'm going to give you a choice. You can either plead guilty to the charges and face the consequences, or you can try to fight this in court. But I warn you, the odds may not be in your favor. Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. She had never intended for things to spiral this far out of control. All she had wanted was to protect her garden and stand up to Karen's entitlement. Now, it seemed, she had jeopardized her entire future. As the detective left the room, Sarah buried her face in her hands, tears of frustration and regret streaming down her cheeks. This was not the ending she had envisioned. But in the end, she had only herself to blame.